The sterile hum of St. Jude's ICU mocked the raw terror coiling in Ayanna Kincaid's gut. Sergeant Kaelen Alani, a decorated warrior barely out of her teens, lay pale and fragile, monitors screaming a silent countdown. Ayanna watched the flatlining rhythm on the screen, a familiar dread awakening memories she'd buried under desert dust and the clang of MASH units. The doctors, brilliant and arrogant, buzzed around Alani, confident they'd fixed her blast injury. But Ayanna knew. She saw the subtle tremor in the pericardial sac, the way the heart pulsed with an unnatural desperation. It wasn't standard. It was that. Her license might be suspended, her methods deemed reckless, but the truth burned in her. This soldier was dying, not from the visible wounds, but from an enemy no one else saw. And only Ayanna, with her scarred hands and forbidden knowledge, held the key. A cold certainty settled, she had to save her. The cool, confident voices of St. Jude's elite surgical team sliced through the hushed tension of the ICU like a surgeon's scalpel through silk. Dr. Xiangli, chief of cardiothoracic surgery, a man whose immaculate scrubs seemed to reflect his own polished ego, leaned over Sergeant Alani's charts. Beside him, Dr. Zahara Suleiman, head of trauma, stood ramrod straight, her severe gaze sweeping across the monitors, missing nothing, or so she believed. Ayanna, stationed quietly by Alani's bedside, felt the subtle tremors in the patient's cardiac rhythm deepen. The aortic graft is textbook, Dr. Suleiman Lee declared, his tone a smooth, unassailable pronouncement. He tapped a finger on the high-resolution scan. Perfect cooptation. There is no structural failure on my watch. His words were for Suleiman, but his dismissive glance flickered towards Ayanna, a silent warning against any junior's impertinence. Suleiman, equally formidable, merely raised an eyebrow. And yet, Dr. Lee, her pressure readings remain stubbornly erratic. The systemic inflammatory markers are trending upwards, not down. A perfect graft shouldn't yield such an imperfect recovery, wouldn't you agree? Her words, while technically professional, carried the razor's edge of unspoken competition, a subtle jockeying for authority that was common between them. Each saw the other as an obstruction, a rival for prestige within the hospital's rigid hierarchy. Ayanna's gut clenched. They were arguing over the superficial ripples while the true current dragged Alani under. She'd spent too many nights in makeshift tents, stitching lives together with grit and improvisation, to mistake a polished surface for deep, structural integrity. The almost imperceptible flutter she'd seen earlier in Alani's carotid pulse was becoming more pronounced, a telltale sign that something deep within was failing, something the standard scans wouldn't easily pick up. It was the same irregular, almost frantic oscillation she'd witnessed in a handful of blast victims whose hearts, though seemingly repaired, harbored a cruel, hidden flaw. "Excuse me, Dr. Lee," Ayanna murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, her gaze fixed on the subtle cyanosis creeping into Alani's nail beds. It was faint, barely noticeable, but Ayanna had learned to read the smallest tells of the body under duress. Her pulse pressure is narrowing. And the pericardial effusion seems to be increasing, however slightly, on the latest echo. Lee didn't even turn. "Nurse Kincaid," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I appreciate your diligence. However, this is a post-operative assessment by 2 department heads. I assure you, we have thoroughly reviewed every aspect of Sergeant Alani's cardiac function. The effusion is within expected parameters for a procedure of this magnitude." Suleiman finally looked at Ayanna, her eyes cold and appraising. "Ayanna, focus on managing her medications. We have a complex trauma patient here, and every detail must adhere to protocol. Unsubstantiated observations only complicate an already delicate situation." It was a polite dismissal, but the message was clear: stay in your lane, rookie. Ayanna felt a familiar flush of humiliation creep up her neck, a flashback to the boardroom where her unorthodox, life-saving actions had been branded reckless. A wave of fear, both for Alani and for herself, washed over Ayanna. The memory of the tribunal, the pronouncement of her suspended license, the whispers of her unconventional methods, it all pressed down on her, choking the words she desperately needed to say. She couldn't risk another professional suicide. Not here, not now, not when Alani's life hung by such a thread. Yet, Alani's decline wasn't a whisper any longer. The low, mournful thump-thump of her heart monitor began to skip, then flutter, then produce a frantic, irregular drumbeat. Her blood pressure dipped again, more sharply this time. Lee, finally turning, frowned. Suleiman's eyes narrowed. Peripheral vasodilation, Lee mused, more to himself than anyone else, though a flicker of unease crossed his face. Perhaps a systemic septic response. Let's double the broad-spectrum antibiotics, Dr. Suleiman. Or a myocardial contusion exacerbating existing damage, Suleiman countered, her voice taut. Order another stat cardiac enzyme panel. Now. They continued to bicker, their theories diverging, their eyes locked in a contest of wills, while the patient between them slipped further away. Ayanna's gaze, however, was fixed on the minute, almost imperceptible pulsation of Alani's jugular vein, a dance of life and death growing increasingly frantic. She knew, with chilling certainty, that they were missing it. All of it. The real problem, the unique, fatal flaw, was unfolding right before their arrogant, brilliant eyes. Alani's oxygen saturation dipped sharply, the alarm a soft, persistent chime that none of the senior doctors seemed to register above their escalating professional debate. The sergeant's chest heaved once, a shallow, desperate gasp, and then her eyes fluttered, glassy and unfocused. The heart monitor's frantic rhythm sputtered, then flatlined. The flatline shrieked, a sudden, brutal severing of life's delicate thread. The room, moments ago filled with the measured hum of professional debate, exploded into a maelstrom of frantic motion. Charge to 200. Dr. Lee bellowed, snatching the paddles. Clear. The jolt arced, slamming through Alani's still form, her body arching involuntarily before settling back, lifeless. The monitor remained an unforgiving, silent line. Again. 300. Clear. Dr. Suleiman, her usual composure shattered, was already preparing the next shock. Her eyes, usually so sharp, darted wildly between the monitor and Alani's ashen face. She was missing it. They all were. Ayanna's gut twisted with a cold, piercing dread. This wasn't a simple cardiac arrest. This was a consequence, a reaction to something far more insidious. It's the aorta, Ayanna's voice, a thin whisper born of pure terror and conviction, barely broke through the din of microtear. The pressure's too high for the conventional repair. It's bleeding out, slowly, into the pericardium. Lee whirled, his face contorted with fury. Nurse Kincaid, now is not the time for amateur diagnoses. We have a patient coding. He gestured frantically for more pressors. Epinephrine. Stat. But Dr. Lee, the grafting technique, Ayanna pressed, stepping forward, her hands clenched. She felt the tremor starting in her fingers, the desperate urgency of a battlefield medic seeing a wound that only she knew how to close. It's an improvised vascular graft. I've seen it work with injuries just like this, when nothing else would hold. She knew the words sounded insane, crude, against the polished professionalism of St. Jude's. Suleiman, sweat beading on her forehead, glanced at Ayanna with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Nurse, that's preposterous. We are in the most advanced surgical theater in the country. There is no improvised technique that supersedes tried and true protocols. Her eyes, though, held a flicker of something close to panic. They were losing her. They were really losing her. But this isn't conventional. Ayanna cried, her voice cracking. Her injury, it's a specific blast trauma. It needs to be woven. It needs something that integrates with the existing tissue under extreme pressure. Standard sutures will just tear through. She pictured the crude, strong stitches she'd learned to make, the way the unfamiliar materials bonded to the ravaged flesh, holding when everything else failed. It was ugly, but it worked. It saved lives. Just then, Dr. Dmitry Novak, drawn by the alarms and the rising chaos, stepped into the room. His stern gaze swept over the frantic scene, landing with chilling precision on Ayanna. Nurse Kincaid, his voice was a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the noise more effectively than any shout. Have you forgotten your current status? Ayanna flinched as if struck. The words hung in the air, cold and damning, suspended license. The memory of the tribunal, the accusations of unorthodox practices and endangering patients for the very techniques she was now advocating, washed over her. The shame, the professional death sentence, had been absolute. "Dr. Novak, please." Ayanna pleaded, her voice choked with a raw, agonizing fear, not for herself, but for Alani. "She's going to die if we don't try something different. I know how to do this. I've done it before." Lee scoffed. "Done what, exactly, nurse?" "Fabricated a fantastical tale of battlefield heroics to justify your questionable past?" His tone dripped with contempt, his gaze searing. "Stay back. You are a liability." As if on cue, Alani's heart monitor issued another mournful, drawn-out groan before falling silent again. The flatline was back, more resolute this time. A nurse cried out. "No pulse." Despair clawed at Ayanna's throat. Her hands trembled violently. She knew. She could see the invisible tear, the way the heart pulsed, struggling against its own unraveling. The solution, crude as it was, burned in her mind. But she was powerless. A rookie, disgraced, her warnings ignored by titans who were too proud, too rigid, too blind to see beyond their established texts and protocols. The room became a blur of desperate, futile motion. Compression started again, a rhythmic thud against Alani's chest. Drugs were pushed. But Ayanna knew it was useless. They were fighting the wrong battle. Alani's life, a vibrant tapestry of courage and sacrifice, was slipping away, thread by agonizing thread, under the very hands meant to save her. A silent scream ripped through Ayanna's soul. She was going to die. And Ayanna, the only one who might save her, was being forced to watch. Ayanna's despair cuts deep, doesn't it? That feeling of having the answer, knowing what's right, but being dismissed, ignored, it's something many of us can relate to. We've all been overlooked at some point. If Ayanna's struggle resonates with you, and you believe in the power of the underdog, we have a special invitation. Join our incredible global community. Hit that subscribe button and become part of our family. Your support means the world to us and truly helps us bring you more compelling, better produced stories of resilience and unexpected heroism. We'd love to have you with us. The rhythmic thud of compressions was a death knell. Alani's skin had taken on a terrifying waxy pallor, her lips a faint blue. Dr. Lee, sweat beading on his brow, was shouting orders that no one seemed to hear, or perhaps, no one believed could work anymore. Dr. Suleiman had a hand clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of professional defeat and personal grief. Novak, usually so composed, was pacing like a caged animal, muttering about lawsuits and reputation. Ayanna, her hand still trembling from the rough removal, stood frozen at the periphery. The despair was a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She had seen this look before, in countless makeshift clinics under skies filled with the dust of distant explosions. It was the look of a life draining away, defying all conventional efforts. And she, the only one with a sliver of unorthodox hope, was rendered useless. This wasn't just a patient, this was Kaelen Alani, a soldier, a hero, whose courage deserved more than this ignominious end. Suddenly, the controlled chaos of the trauma base shattered. The double doors burst open with a force that rattled their frames. Every head snapped towards the entrance. Standing there, framed by two grim-faced military police officers, was a figure of absolute authority. He was tall, ramrod straight, in a perfectly pressed uniform, gleaming with medals and the unmistakable insignia of a 3-star general. His gaze swept over the scene, dismissive of the medical titans, cutting through the panic until it landed, unerringly, on Ayanna. "Where is Nurse Kincaid?" His voice was not a shout, but a low, resonant rumble that nonetheless commanded instant silence. Dr. Lee, startled, stumbled forward. "General. General Carmichael, I presume?" "I am Dr. Lee, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery." "With all due respect, sir, this is a critical medical emergency. We are doing everything in our power for Sergeant Alani. Nurse Kincaid is a rookie RN, currently suspended, and frankly, irrelevant to this situation. Carmichael's eyes, as sharp as honed steel, didn't leave Ayanna. Irrelevant? He took a measured step into the room. Dr. Lee, your everything has brought Sergeant Alani to the brink of death. My intelligence suggests Nurse Kincaid possesses a skill set that might just pull her back. Novak, regaining some composure, stepped forward, his corporate smile faltering. General, with all due respect, the hospital board suspended Ms. Kincaid's license for unorthodox practices. She cannot operate, she cannot even assist. It's a matter of protocol, liability. Liability? Carmichael's laugh was a cold, sharp bark that silenced Novak instantly. The Pentagon assumes full liability, Doctor. What's your alternative? To let a decorated soldier die on your watch because of protocol? He finally looked at Ayanna, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Nurse Kincaid. The intelligence gathered from the Zafir conflict zone mentions an improvised vascular grafting technique you developed. It's crude, unconventional, but effective for unique blast injuries like Sergeant Alani's microtear. Is that correct? Ayanna swallowed, her voice a reedy whisper, barely audible above the rhythmic thump of compressions. Yes, General. I believe it could work. Her gaze flickered to Alani, then to the stunned faces of Lee, Suleiman, and Novak. Their disdain was palpable, mixed now with disbelief and a dawning, terrible realization. Then you will perform it, Carmichael stated, not as a request, but as an order. He turned to his MP. Secure the patient. We're airlifting her. The room erupted. Airlifting? Suleiman shrieked, her voice cracking. She's unstable. She won't survive the transfer. She won't survive staying here. Carmichael countered, his voice rising now, echoing with the authority of command. You've proven that. Nurse Kincaid, prepare to move. You're going with her. A wave of nausea washed over Ayanna. Go with her? Into the sky, with the very person whose life hung by the thread only she could mend? The fear, a beast she had thought long caged, roared back to life. It was the fear of failure, of the immense pressure, of once again defying every established norm, of being judged and condemned. But then her eyes met Alani's, even in unconsciousness, and she saw the ghost of a warrior spirit. Alani wasn't just a patient, she was a beacon, a symbol. And Ayanna, for all her quiet nature, was a warrior in her own right, her battlefield just as brutal, just as unforgiving. This wasn't just about saving Alani's life, it was about reclaiming her own. It was about standing up to the rigid arrogance that had dismissed her, ostracized her, and nearly killed this soldier. The initial terror gave way to a surge of pure, defiant resolve. She felt a strength she hadn't known she possessed, a quiet fury at the injustice, and a burning, undeniable certainty that she could do this. General, Ayanna said, her voice firmer now, drawing surprised glances from everyone, I'll need specific equipment. Improvised, yes, but I still need materials. Carmichael nodded, already gesturing to his team. They're being loaded now. We anticipated your requirements. Outside, a deep, pulsating thrum began to vibrate through the very structure of St. Jude's. The sound grew, a deafening crescendo, as a massive military transport helicopter descended, its rotors churning the air, kicking up a whirlwind of dust and debris from the helipad. The roar drowned out all further objections from the hospital staff. Dr. Lee watched, his face a mask of utter humiliation and disbelief, as the military medics swiftly disconnected Alani from the array of machines that had failed her. Dr. Suleiman could only stare, mouth agape. Novak stood frozen, his reputation, his carefully constructed world, crumbling around him. Ayanna took a deep breath, steeling herself. The transformation was internal, but profound. The modest, quiet rookie RN was gone. In her place stood a woman defined by courage and singular purpose, ready to face the impossible. She turned towards the doors, towards the roaring helicopter, towards the desperate chance to save a life and, in doing so, save a part of herself. The decision was made. Now, the impossible task awaited. The inside of the Black Hawk was a maelstrom of organized chaos. The roaring turbines vibrated through every surface, a bone-deep tremor that made speech impossible without shouting into comms. Air, thick with the metallic tang of jet fuel and sterile disinfectant, swirled around them. Sergeant Alani, already intubated and draped, lay strapped to a narrow cot, the military medics moving with a practiced, brutal efficiency that startled even Dr. Lee. General Hammond, seeing the stunned trio of Lee, Suleiman, and Novak hesitating at the ramp, had cut through Novak's stuttered protests. "You three, too," he bellowed, his voice carrying surprising authority over the din you'll bear witness. Shoved unceremoniously aboard, they now clung to various handholds, their faces a mixture of indignation and bewildered awe, as the helicopter lifted off with a sudden, stomach-lurching lurch. St. Jude's rapidly shrank into a toy model below. Ayanna Kincaid felt a familiar surge of terror, cold and visceral, but another sensation pushed through, a fierce, primal clarity. This wasn't St. Jude's pristine or. This was a battlefield, roaring and alive, and Alani was her patient. She strapped herself into a jump seat beside the cot, the military surgical team, a grim-faced surgeon and two quiet assistants, deferring to her with an unsettling reverence. They knew. They understood the legend of the ghost nurse from forgotten engagements, the one who salvaged the unsalvageable. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled as she took the sterile scalpel offered by a medic. But the moment the cool metal met her glove, the trembling ceased. It was as if an internal switch flipped. The world narrowed to Alani's chest, the barely perceptible thrum of her failing heart visible beneath the gauze. Dr. Lee, crammed against a bulkhead, watched, his breath catching in his throat. He'd seen surgeons operate under pressure, but never in this. Never with such a desperate, raw edge. He expected fumbling, hesitation, the telltale signs of a rookie overwhelmed. Instead, Ayanna moved with a fluid grace, her movements economical, precise, almost ritualistic. She ignored the turbulence, the shifting light, the deafening noise. Her focus was absolute, terrifying in its intensity. Ayanna leaned over Alani, her brow furrowed. The military surgeon quickly exposed the damaged area, revealing the subtle, nearly invisible aortic microtear, a phantom wound that had baffled Lee and Suleiman. It was exactly as Ayanna had described. A profound, almost spiritual calm descended upon her. This was her element, her dark specialty. She began. Her hands worked, not with the delicate, refined instruments of St. Jude's, but with a stark, almost crude simplicity. She called for specific sutures, thicker, stronger, and for a patch of synthetic material that looked deceptively ordinary. Lee's eyes widened. This wasn't standard cardiothoracic procedure. It was different. Bold. Her technique was less about repair, more about forceful, definitive containment. She moved with an animal instinct, anticipating every tremor of the helicopter, every subtle shift in Alani's vitals projected onto a small, rugged monitor. Dr. Suleiman, initially seething at the flagrant disregard for protocol, now found herself mesmerized. Ayanna wasn't just performing surgery, she was waging war. The precision, the speed, the almost violent certainty with which she secured the graft, binding it directly to the heart wall, seemed impossible given the environment. Every stitch was a declaration, every movement an act of defiance against impending death. Novak, pale and clinging to a support, could only stare. The disgraced nurse, the reckless medic, was a force of nature. He watched her hands, strong and sure, as she pushed the limits of what he knew to be possible, the helicopter shaking, vibrating, a constant, violent reminder of the knife edge between life and death. Ayanna, her face a mask of sweat and concentration, was not a nurse. She was a weapon, honed and lethal, in the fight for Alani's life. A sudden, sharp lurch of the helicopter threatened to throw her off balance. A warning blared from the vital signs monitor. Alani's heart, already precarious, fluttered violently. The unexpected complication hit. Ayanna paused, not in panic, but in fierce assessment, her eyes narrowing. This was it. The real test. The helicopter jolted again, more violently this time, and a shrill, incessant alarm pierced the roaring din. Alani's heart rate plummeted, a chaotic, desperate arrhythmia replacing the already unstable rhythm. The microtear, under the extreme stress of the descent and the improvised repair, had just become a catastrophic macrofailure. A new, larger laceration bloomed across the freshly grafted tissue, gushing dark blood, a torrent threatening to undo everything. Novak gasped, a guttural sound of pure horror. The medic next to him swore under his breath, reaching for a defibrillator. This wasn't just a complication, it was the abyss. But Ayanna didn't flinch. Her eyes, usually so guarded, blazed with an icy clarity that stripped away fear, leaving only fierce determination. This was the moment she had trained for, endured for. This was the chaos of the battlefield, distilled to its most brutal essence, demanding not protocol, but pure, unadulterated instinct. "No," she commanded, her voice cutting through the panic, surprisingly steady. "Too fragile. It'll tear her heart apart." Her mind, a whirlwind of kinetic energy, processed 100 variables in a fraction of a second. She couldn't regraft, the tissue wouldn't hold. She couldn't repair the new tear conventionally, there wasn't enough time, enough stability, enough anything. Then, a flicker. A memory from a makeshift tent, sand in her teeth, a dying soldier with a nearly identical injury. A desperate, impossible solution. "Hand me the cardiac suture, smallest gauge," she instructed the medic, her voice sharper, more authoritative than Novak had ever heard from her. "And a tissue adhesive, no, that one, the military-grade sealant." Her hands moved with a blur of precise, almost violent grace. Instead of attempting a direct repair of the now raging tear, she performed an audacious, high-stakes maneuver. With a series of impossibly quick, deep stitches, she created a tension-free bridge, using Alani's own robust pericardial tissue to gently cradle and reinforce the shredded aortic wall. It was a technique so unorthodox, so defiant of standard surgical practice, that it bordered on reckless genius. She wasn't repairing the tear, she was rerouting the force around it, creating a living, breathing bypass within seconds, then sealing the entire weakened area with the powerful adhesive. Every fiber of her being screamed focus. The roar of the helicopter, the blare of the alarms, the grim faces surrounding her, all faded into an indistinct hum. There was only Alani's heart, her hands, and the desperate dance between life and death. Her brow was furrowed, a single bead of sweat tracing a path down her temple, but her movements were liquid, confident. She tied off the final knot, a whisper-thin thread holding together a life, then applied a final, precise layer of sealant, her breath held. Then, she straightened. A long, shuddering breath escaped her lips, the first real breath she'd taken in what felt like an eternity. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled almost imperceptibly as she lowered her instruments. The incessant blare of the critical alarm abruptly ceased. The vital signs monitor, which had been a chaotic tapestry of angry red spikes and flatlines, began to calm. Slowly, tentatively, Alani's heart rate returned to a stable rhythm. Blood pressure, which had been plummeting into oblivion, started to climb. The color, which had drained from Alani's face, began to return, a faint, almost imperceptible flush. Silence, thick and profound, descended upon the helicopter's cabin, broken only by the steady thrum of the rotors. Novak stared, his jaw slack, his carefully constructed world of rules and protocols shattered around him. The air crackled with a palpable shift, a breathtaking release of tension. The military official, who had watched Ayanna with a calm, unwavering gaze, now offered a single, slow nod, his eyes conveying a depth of quiet triumph and vindication. Ayanna, spent and emotionally raw, leaned back, her head resting against the cold metal of the helicopter's interior. A wave of exhaustion, so profound it threatened to buckle her knees, washed over her. But beneath the exhaustion, a surge of pure, unadulterated relief bloomed in her chest, a warmth spreading through her veins. Alani was alive. She had done it. A quiet sob, choked and ragged, escaped her. It wasn't a sob of despair, but of catharsis, of the immense weight of the world lifting from her shoulders. The ghosts of her past, the judgment, the ridicule, the fear, they began to recede, replaced by the profound, undeniable truth of this moment. She wasn't disgraced. She was extraordinary. Novak, his face pale with emotion, found his voice. "My God," he whispered, the words barely audible above the engine drone. His eyes, fixed on Ayanna, were no longer dismissive or angry, but filled with a dawning, reverent awe. You actually did it." It was not a question, but a profound, shaken validation. In that moment, the chief of the hospital board, the man who had seen her as a liability, finally saw her for what she truly was, a miracle worker. The cabin of the Black Hawk, moments ago a crucible of fear and desperate action, settled into a reverent silence. The whir of the rotors, once a frantic pulse, now seemed a steady, reassuring thrum. Sergeant Alani's vitals, projected onto a small monitor, held steadfast. Ayanna, still hunched over the patient, her instruments now carefully laid aside, felt the tremors in her hands begin to subside. A profound exhaustion, bone-deep and overwhelming, threatened to buckle her knees. But beneath it, a surge of pure, unadulterated relief bloomed in her chest, a warmth spreading through her veins. Alani was alive. She had done it. A quiet sob, choked and ragged, escaped her. It wasn't a sob of despair, but of catharsis, of the immense weight of the world lifting from her shoulders. The ghosts of her past, the judgment, the ridicule, the fear, they began to recede, replaced by the profound, undeniable truth of this moment. She wasn't disgraced. She was extraordinary. Novak, his face pale with emotion, found his voice. "My God," he whispered, the words barely audible above the engine drone. His eyes, fixed on Ayanna, were no longer dismissive or angry, but filled with a dawning, reverent awe. You actually did it." It was not a question, but a profound, shaken validation. In that moment, the chief of the hospital board, the man who had seen her as a liability, finally saw her for what she truly was, a miracle worker. The Pentagon official, Colonel Reed, stepped forward, a grim smile breaking through his earlier intensity. "We knew you could, Nurse Kincaid. We've been tracking you since Darfur." The words hung in the air, a sudden, powerful revelation. Darfur. Not just a field medic, but a ghost from forgotten conflicts. Ayanna's gaze, still gentle, turned to Reed, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The helicopter touched down with a soft bump on the helipad of St. Jude's. A waiting trauma team, a flurry of green scrubs and gurneys, swarmed the craft. As Alani was carefully transferred, a hush fell over the assembled hospital staff. Dr. Lee and Dr. Suleiman stood rigid at the edge of the crowd, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. They watched as Novak, usually imperious and composed, now walked beside Ayanna, his hand resting almost protectively on her arm. Inside, as Alani was rushed to post-op, Colonel Reed addressed the stunned hospital leadership. Nurse Kincaid's license was suspended for performing an unapproved vascular graft. "What you failed to understand," he stated, his voice ringing with authority, was the context. Ayanna Kincaid was a field nurse in some of the most hellish, under-resourced conflict zones on Earth, where standard protocols were non-existent, and where a choice between unorthodox and death was made daily. She wasn't just performing unapproved procedures, she was pioneering them, saving lives when no one else could, or dared. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Her technique, crude by first-world standards, was born of necessity and unparalleled ingenuity. The specific aortic microtear Sergeant Alani sustained? We've seen it only a handful of times, almost exclusively in blast injuries from forgotten corners of the globe. And Ayanna Kincaid had encountered it. Her records, though buried in old military files, detail several successful interventions using this very technique. Dr. Lee, his face drained of color, could only manage a strangled, but, her reports, they were so sparse. We dismissed them as anecdotal. "Because you weren't looking for a hero," Reed retorted, his gaze sharp. "You were looking for a flaw. Nurse Kincaid isn't just a nurse, she is a survivor, a quiet innovator who carried the burden of her past expertise because no one here was ready to understand it. She watched countless people die because she didn't have the tools. When she did have the knowledge, she used it, even knowing the personal cost. Ayanna, standing slightly behind Novak, felt a warmth spread through her. Not of pride, but of profound relief. For years, she had carried the silent judgment, the whispers of being a maverick, a danger. Now, in the stark, sterile halls of St. Jude's, her truth was finally laid bare, championed by someone who understood. Yet, her focus remained firmly on Alani. "How is she, Colonel?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the stunned silence. Her humility was not an act, it was intrinsic. The patient always came first. Novak, regaining some composure, turned to her, his eyes still holding that new respect. "Stable, Nurse Kincaid. Remarkably stable. She'll make a full recovery, thanks to you." He then faced the rest of the board, his voice firmer now. "Effective immediately, Nurse Kincaid's license suspension is lifted. Furthermore, I will be recommending a commendation for exceptional service and innovative practice." Dr. Suleiman, usually so composed, looked visibly shaken. We were wrong, Ayanna," she murmured, a rare admission of fallibility. Her gaze, for the first time, held genuine admiration, stripped of its earlier disdain. The transformation in their perception was palpable, a tidal wave of recognition washing over Ayanna. The once disgraced rookie now stood, quietly radiant, a testament to silent strength and undeniable skill. The weight of her past lifted, replaced by the affirmation she never sought but so profoundly deserved. The aftermath at St. Jude's was a slow, deliberate unraveling of old certainties and the cautious weaving of new ones. The story of Sergeant Kaelen Alani, the miracle on a military helicopter, and the unassuming nurse who saved her life, spread like wildfire, first within the hospital, then echoing in medical journals and news cycles. Dr. Xiangli, whose arrogance had been the most pronounced, found his professional world abruptly reordered. The media, initially captivated by the Pentagon helicopter angle, soon dug deeper, unearthing the internal struggles at St. Jude's. His dismissal of Ayanna's expertise, captured in leaked reports of the initial incident, became a glaring symbol of medical hubris. While his position as chief of cardiothoracic surgery wasn't immediately stripped, his technical skill remained undeniable, his influence waned dramatically. He faced internal review, his research grants were temporarily frozen, and junior surgeons who once vied for his attention now gave him a wide berth, their respect replaced by a cool, professional distance. The most poignant consequence for Lee was perhaps the internal one, the gnawing realization that his rigid adherence to protocol had nearly cost a life, and that true innovation could emerge from the most unexpected corners. He began, slowly and painfully, to listen more, to question his own infallible image. It was a humbling, transformative experience, cracking the hardened shell of his ego. Dr. Zahara Suleiman, in contrast, navigated her consequences with a quiet dignity that surprised many. Her admission of error, however brief, marked a turning point. She publicly advocated for a re-evaluation of St. Jude's protocol review process, particularly for highly specialized or unconventional techniques. The rigid framework she once championed began to soften. She initiated a new program for expedited clinical review for novel field methodologies, openly acknowledging that battlefields and austere environments often forged medical solutions years ahead of standard practice. Her transformation was profound. She shed some of her imperious demeanor, replaced by a thoughtful, more empathetic leadership style. She became a mentor to younger physicians, encouraging them to look beyond the textbook and trust their instincts, a testament to Ayanna's quiet influence. Dr. Dmitry Novak, the hospital board chair, initially faced intense scrutiny. The suspended nurse scandal threatened to engulf his carefully curated image. However, his decisive action in immediately lifting Ayanna's suspension and commending her proved to be a masterstroke of crisis management. He shrewdly leveraged the narrative of redemption and innovation, presenting St. Jude's as a place that, while imperfect, ultimately valued lives over antiquated bureaucracy. He commissioned an independent committee to review the hospital's culture of innovation and hierarchy, positioning himself as a leader committed to progress. While his reputation took a hit, it ultimately emerged stronger, rebuilt on the foundation of genuine accountability and a newfound appreciation for the unconventional. Meanwhile, Sergeant Kaelen Alani made a full, albeit gradual, recovery. Her story became a source of national pride, a symbol of resilience. She met with Ayanna weeks later, a fragile young woman whose eyes held a depth beyond her years. "You didn't just save my life, Ayanna," Kaelen whispered, her voice still weak but clear. "You gave me back my future." Their bond, forged in the crucible of a helicopter and a desperate surgery, was profound and unspoken. Ayanna Kincaid, no longer bound by the chains of fear or past discredit, found her authentic life. She remained quiet, her humility an intrinsic part of her character, but she was no longer invisible. St. Jude's created a specialized Advanced Trauma Intervention Unit, ATIU, and Ayanna, with her unique blend of battlefield grit and precise skill, was its undisputed lead. She dedicated herself to teaching her improvised vascular grafting technique, not as a replacement for standard methods, but as a critical last resort for extreme cases. Her past, once a source of shame and professional exile, was now her greatest asset, a wellspring of wisdom born from necessity. Her story became a beacon, not just for nurses, but for anyone who felt marginalized by established systems. It was a testament to the idea that true heroism often wears no cape, speaks no grand pronouncements, but resides in the quiet courage to act when others falter, to see solutions where others see only defeat. Ayanna's life became a living example that the most profound change doesn't always come from revolution, but from the quiet, persistent voice of truth, proving that sometimes the greatest leaps forward are made when we dare to look beyond the rigid lines and embrace the extraordinary potential within us all. Ayanna's journey reminds us that true strength often lies in embracing our unique gifts, even when the world tells us otherwise. It's about the quiet courage to trust our instincts and challenge the established path for the greater good. Have you ever witnessed or embodied such unconventional heroism? Share your stories with us in the comments below. If Ayanna's unwavering spirit resonated with you, please subscribe to join our growing global community. Your support empowers us to bring more compelling and inspiring tales like this one to life, connecting us all around the world. Thank you so much for watching, for being a part of our journey, and for valuing the extraordinary within us all.